For a moment only, I was weak. No longer. I want you to pay for what you've done.
Grief is a powerful emotion. The loss of something irreplaceable is often enough to send even the most clear-hearted, wise individuals amongst us down a grim spiral of darkness, depression, and irrationality. Grief can twist us, it can rewire our brains, it can fill us with rage, with spite, and have us cursing the very earth we walk on. Baldur's Gate 3's Ketheric Thorm, in so many ways, is a walking, talking study of this exact emotional landslide, a villain that is as deeply troubled as he is evil. Well, over the last handful of months, I released a pair of nearly hour-long videos on the main villains of the original 2 Baldur's Gate games, the Deathbringer, Sarevok Anchev, and then recently John Irenicus, the Exile. Both of them fantastic, iconic, and wonderfully evil men that act as just sensational opposition in those classic adventures through the land of Faerun. And so, it looks like Baldur's Gate is back on the menu, boys. Why don't we just keep this train rolling, son, right into Baldur's Gate 3 and its main antagonist, or I guess we should say, main antagonists. Because as much as this kind of series-reviving title shares with the originals, I would say villainy in this game is far more evenly spread out. Instead of a single monolith of malice that is goading you toward a memorable final encounter, there's really like a smattering of fascinating villains with very, very different presences, backstories, and motives, all working against your general efforts across the game's 3 main acts. That being said, I feel that at the core of this experience lies 3 characters, 3 malevolent individuals that in this beautiful and natural way unfurl the main narrative of Baldur's Gate 3 through their own unique and elaborate schemes. Characters that work in a sort of chaotic disharmony with each other, but they share the same lofty aspirations and long-term malevolent goals. Known in-game here as the Chosen 3, this is Lord Enver Gortash, Orin the Red, and of course, General Ketheric Thorm. Now, the overall narrative of Baldur's Gate 3 is this massive and, in my opinion, impressively woven thing. Countless threads, big and small, interacting, referencing each other, and of course, the whole thing is tailored to allow for an insane amount of player agency and choice in any single playthrough. But if you ask me, Ketheric Thorm is one of the single most memorable, the most fantastically written, and definitely the finest acted of all of the threads in the entire game. A man whose actions narratively just touch so many aspects of this story. A man that centuries ago lived a full life, died a full death, and is back now from the grave to regain his cursed domain, and then some. Welcome everyone to the Villainpedia, a video series on the channel where we take long, hard looks at the most evil characters the medium of video games has to offer and try to find out what makes them tick. Now, needless to say, there are major spoilers ahead, mostly for Acts 1 and 2 of this game. I am Ghost, your host as always, and this video is very much going to act as a sort of foundational part 1 as we will next tackle Orin and then finally Gortash as the villainy in this game really takes full form. A quick thank you to all of my wonderful patrons who support away from YouTube, and without further ado, take my hand and follow me on this emotional roller coaster that is the life and death of Ketheric Thorm. Well, with any villain, I think the best place to start is obviously with the backstory and the path that they tread toward evil. But especially so when we're talking about the Chosen 3 here, because I think to understand how this trio functions mechanically as a sort of evil super team, we need to really track these characters' lives and how they all came to work together and eventually stand in your way during the game. Well, with Ketheric, unfortunately, his early life is a total mystery. We know that he lived several hundred years before the events of Baldur's Gate 3, and we know that he is a half-elf, meaning one of his parents was a human, with the elven half of his blood being that of a high elf. Now, this is notable because there are typically 2 variants of high elves in Forgotten Realms lore. You have sun elves and you have moon elves, both with kind of slight differences and cultural identities. But I do think it's very safe to assume that Ketheric's blood was that of a moon elf, not only because of his kind of fair skin and silvery hair, but because for the overwhelming majority of his mortal life, Ketheric was a devout follower of the goddess known as Selûne, the Moon Maiden, a chaotic good deity representing not only the moon itself, but also the domains of knowledge, of life, and of twilight. More on that in a minute. Ketheric was born, raised, and lived out his days in a region known as the Western Heartlands. Now, this is just kind of like a general term that means the whole inland area of the Sword Coast, and it's made up of all sorts of things: rolling foothills, grasslands, woods, farms, swamps, and of course, a vast assortment of small and large settlements. But the specific town and surrounding area we are really talking about here is known as Wraithwin, a rather simplistic little village that lay on the banks of the river Chianthar between the cities of Baldur's Gate and El Turiel. Now, it seems that before Ketheric ever came around at all, the Thorm family was of some sort of prominence in this area. They are referred to as a great noble house of the past several places in-game, but it definitely could just be Ketheric, his life and actions alone, that established the Thorm family name. Well, as Ketheric reached adulthood, he married a fellow half-elven woman named Melodia, and the two had a single daughter together named Isabel. And by every single indication, this early part of Ketheric's life was defined by his fierce love for his family, his tenderness, and of course, his zealous devotion to his god. Additionally, Thorm presided as the governor of the town of Wraithwin, which itself became a very well-known haven for Selûne worshippers far and wide. And its strategic location between these two large, bustling cities made it the perfect place to set up a little toll house, a couple shops, some taverns, and notably, a very famous house of healing where the sick and injured came from all the surrounding area to feel the mending rays of the Mood Maiden. Ketheric and his family ruled from and lived in this beautiful castle that Thorm had built, known as Moonrise Towers, and man, it was a good life. But of course, this is a villain video, so nothing good can last forever. Well, it's hard to emphasize how genuinely in love Ketheric and Melodia were. One person close to the two we meet in-game even suggests that Melodia was kind of the one who helped Thorm to deepen his devotion to Selûne and become more of a family man. But tragically, she would be the first domino to fall. Seemingly out of nowhere, Melodia was struck by some sort of terrible illness, and even with all the power of the House of Healing, talented clerics in the town, and the Mood Maiden herself at Ketheric's disposal, his wife's condition was worsening every day until eventually she passed away. Now, it's absolutely devastating to any young family to lose a parent. There's no two ways about it. Isabel was really just a child at the time, so to say that Ketheric would be changed by this event, I mean, that's a vast understatement. As he weathered this emotional storm, he clung tightly to his only daughter and attempted to remain true to his goddess despite this unspeakable tragedy. Little did he know that he was inside, taking the first baby steps toward a path of darkness. Well, as we stated in the opening sentence of this video, grief is a powerful emotion. It really can overwhelm a person and change them, even just temporarily as they are processing things. But thanks to Isabel and her unyielding love for her father, Ketheric found some sort of peace again with Selûne and with his life into the future. This shared sorrow brought the two super close together, and as she got older, she began training with Ketheric to become a cleric of Selûne. But Isabel definitely started to show some spunk in her teen years, challenging her father constantly on things, but still bringing him overwhelming joy and that priceless sense of family that he feared he had lost for good, along with his wife. Well, around the time Isabel was reaching adulthood, the Thorms and their subjects were deemed so devout to the Moon Maiden that Selûne herself noticed their worship and sent one of her own daughters, the Aasimar, Dame Aylin, as an emissary to Wraithwin and Moonrise Towers to kind of meet with Ketheric and guide all of these people further in the light of Selûne. You can pretty much think of Aylin as an angel in a mortal body. Well, on her visit, when Aylin met the young Isabel, the two, believe it or not, instantly fell deeply in love, which I think is about as weird as you interpret it to be. But let's just say that Ketheric Thorm did not approve of this love whatsoever. That could be because this immortal angel woman was suddenly seducing his newly 18-year-old daughter, which is a little odd, but also I think Ketheric felt threatened in any way by any outsider that would be drawing his daughter's love away from him. Because think about it, without Isabel, I mean, he would probably feel truly alone. And the more this villain's origin story takes shape, the more it seems like this is one of his deepest, darkest fears. This issue, honestly, would be very short-lived as the next unimaginable tragedy would strike. Isabel, just beginning to live her life and feel deeply, mysteriously died as well. Now, within the game, within the lore books, the dialogues, everything you can find, there is no confirmed cause of death. I suppose it could have just been an illness like her mother, but maybe it was something a little bit more sinister. There are even some very compelling theories out there that a certain rival goddess may have been somewhat responsible for Isabel's doom in an attempt to poison Ketheric Thorm's mind and thus the Selûne worship in this part of the world. Who knows, but if that was the case, it absolutely worked. This loss was so utterly unexpected, so soul-crushing and rending that Ketheric Thorm would never be the same. For the first time in his life, this man fully, openly, and angrily questioned his goddess. How could such horrible tragedies befall this devout family? Why didn't Selûne intervene and save at least one of these women? Is life designed to be this cruel? The slippery slope of darkness and sorrow presented itself, and our boy Ketheric just threw his ass right down the stairs. With Isabel gone, he recklessly abandoned Selûne. He outlawed her worship in his domain and threatened all who would disobey him with a swift death. Ketheric then locked himself away in Moonrise Towers. He drew inward and sought comfort with a new deity, one that we hear plenty about in Baldur's Gate 3, and that is Shar, the Lady of Loss, the neutral evil goddess of darkness, trickery, and grief. Also, the goddess that happens to be the eternal divine rival of Selûne, so draw your own conclusions there. Ketheric was angry, he was vengeful, and he was looking for anything, anyone to take the void, the pain inside of him away and replace it with some sort of purpose. Now, from Shar's perspective, this powerful, desperate person with land, with resources, who has really nothing left to lose, a one-of-a-kind opportunity to spread her own influence, stick it to her own rival, and so she welcomed Thorm with open arms as a chosen. But now I think we need to talk just briefly about this entire concept of being a, quote, chosen, because it's a word that obviously defines the Chosen Three here of Baldur's Gate 3, but it also is present all throughout the Forgotten Realms lore. So this basically just means a mortal has been hand-selected by a deity to act as their champion in some way. You know, an extension of their divine power, but in the material plane. Kind of a super worshipper. And in the process of becoming a chosen, the mortal in question is oftentimes given this wild amount of divine power, and in certain instances elevating that person to demigod status. So with a new dark pep in his step, Ketheric ran off and constructed this massive temple to Shar underneath the Thorm family mausoleum, where he had literally just buried his wife and now child. Now, I'm gonna be honest, it's an extremely dramatic move by Ketheric, but I guess it is appropriate. And all the while, Shar was whispering very sinister things to Thorm, turning him into a monster. Once this temple was completed, he quickly began raising an army of zealous Sharan soldiers from all over the Sword Coast, specifically made up of a brand of fighters dubbed the Dark Justiciars that would help Ketheric in his new venture. Conquering all of those foolish enough to believe in the optimistic light of Selûne, Wraithwind, Moonrise Towers, and beyond, all of it must now fall under Shar's shadow, and all light must be snuffed out. I mean, it sounds evil enough, right? But the devil is really in the details here, because get this, any follower of Shar that would come here to the temple to become a Justiciar would be required to enter and complete a series of very, very demanding mental and physical trials. But the final graduation requirement at the end of those trials was simple. Kill a priestess of Selûne. And this is where Ketheric got very creative and diabolical. He, along with his trusted advisor Balthazar, somehow tricked and captured the late Isabel's lover, Dame Aelin, daughter of Selûne, imprisoning her with powerful magic and chaining her down within the Shadowfell, a separate plane of existence. So any Shar worshipper that made it to the end of their trials would come here and stab the restrained Aelin right through the heart, killing her. The recruit would then be a Dark Justiciar, but of course Aelin being immortal, she would just come back to life shortly after and wait to endure the same suffering from the next recruit all over again. Absolutely filthy evil stuff. But Ketheric, to his credit, in this way created a war machine. Along with his revival of the ancient Sharan Grimforge, I mean, we're talking about a consistently, constantly growing army blessed by an evil goddess that was rapidly conquering a chunk of the Heartlands. And really, Ketheric's prowess as both a warrior on the battlefield and a general should not be understated. He was entirely capable of taking not just the Heartlands, but really the whole of the Sword Coast if he should gain enough momentum. Selûnites were dying. Innocents were suffering, and if I had to guess, Ketheric still felt nothing inside. In an effort to mend that unbearable pain in his heart, Thorm was becoming a serious threat to the world at large. Well, when looking at Ketheric Thorm, physically I mean, for an elf I would say he's rather, rugged, right? Typically when we think about these pointy-eared leaf lovers, I think of a nice close shave and kind of perfectly manscaped appearance. So honestly, he could probably benefit from that very company and the sponsor of today's video, Manscaped. Manscaped is a men's lifestyle and grooming brand that has proved over and over again that it is simply the gold standard for the modern man maintaining the follicle field on both his face and in his underdark. And lately, I've personally been enjoying their most recent innovation, the Performance Package 5.0 Ultra, featuring the Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra electric trimmer. Now, the lawnmower lives up to the name, with its next-gen skin-safe blade heads, which are accompanied by an upgraded trimmer blade and interchangeable foil blade. This thing is cutting with crazy precision. But the package doesn't stop there. It also includes the Weed Whacker 2.0, designed to whack the most stubborn of nose hairs clean out of your head, as well as the Crop Soother and Preserver, a dynamic pair of products to keep you feeling cool and comfortable 24/7, both high and low. So please, my friends, I urge you to support the channel, head over to manscaped.com and get your hands on this Performance Package 5.0 Ultra today. When you use code Ghostcharm, you will get a whopping 20% off, free international shipping, as well as 2 free gifts in your bundle. That is 20% off, free shipping, and free stuff with code Ghostcharm. A huge thank you to Manscaped for sponsoring this video, and now, let's get back to our villain. Well, of course, when you start poking around and doing some light conquering, other people in the world are going to notice, and some very powerful people just to the west in the Baldur's Gate area happen to notice rather quickly. A faction of druids from the Emerald Grove, as well as the Harpers, one of the largest organizations standing against evil in the realms, both stood together to meet Ketheric's Sharan army in this massive war that culminated in a fierce final battle right outside of Moonrise Towers. And actually participating in this big battle were 2 principal elven characters we know very well, Jaheira, the legendary hero, and then Halsin, the druid we can later recruit in-game. But holy smokes, this battle was a brutal affair. So bad, in fact, that there was really no clear winner. There were heavy losses on both sides, and eventually the High Harper Council sent word to Ketheric Thorm that they would like to surrender for both sides' sake. But of course, Ketheric, in his madness, refused the request outwardly and continued the bloodshed. But hold the phone, because another very, very important character we need to bring in right here is, strangely, the architect that built Moonrise Towers for the Thorm family so many years ago. Now, this man was known as Morfred, and we actually get to meet him in Hell much later on as a skeleton man, and he was one of Ketheric's most loyal subjects, and we can assume in some way, I guess, if he built his house, friends. Well, he now, at this point, was one of the surviving Selûne worshippers that was trying to not be murdered by the Dark Justiciars every single day in Wraithwind. But he, in his desperate position, decided to do something about it. Now, one of the greatest characters in Baldur's Gate 3 period, I would say maybe the most beloved across the board, is the deeply evil, dashing gentleman known as Raphael. This character is another one with his hand in just about every narrative pot, a cunning, deal-making, classic portrait of a devil that is absolutely worthy of a video all for himself and then some, maybe someday. Well, Morfred, as this war raged around him, called upon this devil to make a deal, which I think we all know is never the best idea for yourself, right? And these were the terms. Raphael would help in wiping out this Sharan army to weaken Thorm and turn the tide of this war, and in exchange, Morfred offered up his mortal soul. Now, for Raphael, that's no problem. Way easy deal. Any devil, any day of the week, loves collecting souls, so they agreed. And without a second of delay, Raphael sent this big demonic fella named Yurgir, who we actually get to interact with in-game as well, to eradicate Ketheric's forces, and that is exactly what he did. But, I mean, it's kind of cruel, so listen to this. Raphael cursed Yurgir to hear a song playing in his head literally 24/7 up until the last Justiciar was killed. So Yurgir actually started on the back line, breaking into the Sharan temple where these Justiciars were being pumped out and just obliterated these fools. Now, the only Justiciar that was able to elude Yurgir used magic to transform himself into an entire gang of rats and then scattered all around the place hiding. This, of course, led Yurgir to cruelly be stuck in this temple for centuries, unable to complete his contract and cursed with just hearing the same song playing in his head forever. It's a little off topic, but I just love the little details like this, man. I wish I could turn into a pile of rats. I would do it right now. So anyway, this architect, Morfred, and his absurd personal sacrifice honestly allowed the Harpers to surge, defeating the remaining forces on the battlefield and eventually cornering Ketheric, where he was then put to a quick and clean death. This war, just like that, was over. However, as Ketheric Thorm was dying, with his final breaths, he uttered an incantation, a dark, ancient Sharan curse, a sort of blight to be set upon his land and holdings for all time should he be killed. The Harpers, not knowing what he just said or what it meant, just kind of celebrated their victory and then set about burying Ketheric in the Thorm family mausoleum right alongside his deceased wife and daughter. But just soon after, as the Harpers and Druids cleared out and headed back to their respective homes, a horrible shadow began seeping from the mausoleum entrance, a miasma of death and darkness on the natural world that would come to cover all of Moonrise Towers, all of Wraithwind, the surrounding forests, wilds, and roads, consuming this once proud Selûnite town, breaking open the earth and pretty much destroying the entire place. This region came to be known as the Shadow-Cursed Lands, and as years turned to decades and Ketheric Thorm sort of joined the history books, it proved to be a place that was largely uninhabitable. The last laugh of a failed warlord, defeated, dead, and buried. But for this villain, of course, death, that's just the beginning. That was just round one, son. And so now we come to talk about yet another third god, the deity that most players are going to closely associate with Thorm from the mainline quest, and that is Myrkul, Lord of the Dead, Master of Bones, really the Grim Reaper of the Forgotten Realms. One of the ultra-iconic members of the trio of gods known as the Dead Three, the others being Baal, the Lord of Murder, and Bane, the Lord of Tyranny. Now, Baal especially has played a massive role in the Baldur's Gate series, acting as the main driving force behind the entire narrative structure of the original two games. But all three of these gods and their constant ambition for power and influence over their other godlike peers, this is simply everything to this franchise. Now, if you want to know everything about these three deities and their origins, I urge you to watch my Sarevok Anchev video where we really dive into the entire backstory of how these lovely chaps went from daring mortal explorers to straight up divinity. But to put it very simply, these are known as the Dead Three, not because they represent aspects of death and destruction, but because all three of them were at a certain point in history killed. Yes, killed. During an infamous era known as the Time of Troubles, all gods, good and evil, were cast out of their divine thrones and forced to live as avatars amongst mortals, with all three members of this trio being slain while in their fleshy forms, murdered by ambitious mortals or rival gods. But hey, of course, they were not totally destroyed. Through their own foresight and schemes, they all endured somehow over the centuries, and all three were then restored in some way as far lesser forms of their past selves. But since then, they have all been trying desperately to scrabble back up the ladder, return to their former glory and beyond. These three are deeply evil, they're spiteful, and they see all of the mortal plane as their kind of playpen for their own dark desire for power. Now, to be honest, Forgotten Realms lore, it should always be taken with a massive teaspoon of perspective, because straight up, it's a bit of a mess, and that is okay. We're talking about 20 to 25 years of loads of different people writing books, video games, comics, and new editions of the tabletop modules that are constantly rehashing, retelling, or reframing lore things. So I think trying to make sense of the whole timeline, especially when we're talking about gods living and dying, it's just going to drive you insane, and it really just doesn't matter. The fact is, many divines in this setting have been killed, but they just typically don't stay dead. These three just happen to be famous for dying. It's as simple as that. But I think you can kind of see when we're talking about all this stuff, if you don't already know that is, how this whole narrative structure is really meant to work. In their current scheme to regain power and dominate the world, each of these Dead Three needs what? A chosen. A champion to act on their behalf. And about a century after Ketheric Thorm's death, Myrkul was browsing through his options, the catalog of recently deceased. For his chosen, Myrkul needed someone strong, someone with leadership experience but still a cool enough head to make good decisions and lean on their wisdom when it mattered most. Someone skilled in the art of war, with a central base of operations on the Sword Coast where the city of Baldur's Gate would be just a short march away. Come to think of it, what Myrkul was really looking for was a general. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. What is the Dead 3's big new plan? Well, don't worry, it will all come into focus over time. But to put it simply, obviously, Ketheric was perfect for the job, and though he had been dead for a while, and it's nothing a little Merkle magic can't fix, right? Now, the details of how this actually happened are unknown, but Ketheric was revived, risen from the grave, no longer half-elf at all, but an undead. What was demanded of him from Merkle was complete and utter loyalty, body and soul, not only to this deity of death, but to the other chosen two of Ball and Bane, and to this whole scheme to bring death to the world. Ketheric specifically was raised for one purpose and one purpose only, to curate and command a great army which was to march on Baldur's Gate when the time was right, and in return, Isabel would be brought back to his side. So, of course, Ketheric agreed. I mean, a second chance at life. He could do things differently this time. He could be stronger. He could be with his daughter again, and all he had to do was wage this little war? No problem. So for the third time in this man's life, Ketheric had a new divine master, and he headed right back to the curse-choked Moonrise Towers to begin his work. Well, I mentioned him earlier, but Ketheric's closest advisor, Balthazar, a little piglet of a man, was also brought back from the dead in this deal, and guess who was still imprisoned and kind of forgotten about in her little pocket of Shadowfell 100 years later? Dame Aelin. Balthazar went immediately to her prison, probably finding her to be very pissed off, and performed a little profane ritual on this angel, chaining her very spirit and immortality to Ketheric. So not only was our guy now a bearded undead machine with some of the coolest looking armor ever, he was also invulnerable. But tragically for Ketheric, upon her being revived, Isabel didn't exactly rush into her father's arms when they were reunited. Now at first, I'm sure she was some form of happy, albeit a bit confused, but soon she felt her father was unrecognizable, a version of her dad that had been twisted by grief, hatred, war, death, and of course, a ton of smelly necromancy. She understandably questioned her own second chance at life, why she had it at all, and she fled from her father. She left Moonrise Towers and ran out into the Shadow-Cursed lands to hide, denouncing everything her father had done to bring her back to life. And I'm just gonna guess that this must have been one of the single most heartbreaking moments in Ketheric's entire existence. But the general didn't have any time to grieve. He didn't have time to chase down his daughter. He had made a pact with the god of death and plenty of work to do. One of my favorite things about the Chosen Three as a team of villains is how we are only equipped with what we know when we encounter them, and each of them really acts as like a narrative shepherd, revealing new truths and twists and turns to keep you invested and want to hop to the next thing. So I mentioned earlier that this game is structured into 3 separate acts, and each of these Chosen Three are kind of sprinkled throughout the game's runtime to be encountered in a sort of sequence, with Ketheric of course coming first in Act 2. So the backstory, the setup, the motivations, all that is great, but what are we actually going to do about it, right? As far as this being an interactive medium, a video game, what is it that actually takes us, the player, to Ketheric and his seat of power? Well, when you start up a new game in BG3, simply put, you are meant to have literally no clue what's going on at all. The name Ketheric Thorm isn't a blip on your radar for hours and hours. This game very much goes for the disorientation tactic narratively, having your character and several other of the principal party members awake in confusion on this massive illithid ship, flying through Avernus, aka Hell, being pursued by Githyanki fighters on the backs of dragons. I mean, it's insane. Well, unfortunately for you and your entire party, you have all been infected with Mind Flayer parasites, Tadpoles, something you have to prepare yourself to hear a lot about during your time with this game. Nasty little buggers that are fated to have you all painfully transform into a gaggle of horrific Mind Flayers in 3 or so days if you don't get them removed. So once you kind of fight your way through this nautiloid and crash just up the river from the city of Baldur's Gate, your main and really only objective is to assemble your party, venture forth, and find some way, any way, to remove these tadpoles from your brains. But of course, as things progress, something strange happens, or I guess doesn't. You don't turn into Mind Flayers at all, and in fact, you seem to have gained some sort of illithid powers. You're able to impose your will on other people, and you can even mentally detect others around you that have been infected with a parasite of their own. And man, there are loads of folks walking around with these things in their brains, many of them being evil-aligned creatures like goblins, ogres, and just kind of generally the outcasts of the civilized world. But all of them, for the most part, have come to worship this new god that they call the Absolute. And this is big, boy. Well, honestly, Act 1 here is almost its own contained video game altogether. I think took 33 hours to clear it on my first playthrough with just so many quests and things to discover, interesting characters and locations. But the main story hook you come across, aside from all the tadpole junk, is this rather large dispute between a druidic enclave and a nearby massive goblin camp, where you, the player, can obviously interact with both sides and then pick a side and assist whichever faction you prefer. It's a pretty heavy-handed good or evil path to kind of set your character out on early. But the goblin side is full of those infected with the tadpoles, and they call themselves true souls. Now there are these 3 principal leaders of that side that you can speak with, and once you reveal your true soul status to them, you start to get some fascinating information about a guy named Ketheric Thorm and a place called Moonrise Towers. But I just love that within Act 1, it all remains shrouded in so much mystery, a foreboding potential home base for this odd growing cult of the Absolute with this master at the helm. But another key seed that is planted here in Act 1 is when you embark on this long quest called the Night Song. So supposedly this ancient relic called the Night Song is said to be hidden in a dark place in the world, and there's a wizard in Baldur's Gate that is willing to pay a super high price for it to be brought to him. More on that later, just keep it in mind. Well, towards the second half of Act 1, as you're really uncovering new info about the Absolute, you are spoken to directly by this powerful, disembodied voice.
Hear my voice. Obey my command.
The voice is irresistible. You recognize the overwhelming authority that you've used on others, only infinitely stronger. Your vision clouds, leaving you in a dark, featureless shadowscape, nothingness in every direction. Then there are 3 figures before you. An armored male elf exuding power and command. A handsome younger man with a quick, easy smile. And a pale young woman with even paler eyes.
These are my chosen. They speak for me. Aid their search for the weapon, and you will be worthy to stand beside them in my presence.
The visions fade and the voice falters as a strange energy swells around you. The many-sided artifact. Somehow you understand it's repelling the presence.
My power grows. My forces gather. The reckoning draws near.
And this is the Absolute, and it's overwhelming. You are shown this image of the Chosen 3 and promised a great reward if you assist in finding this artifact, a weapon. And guess what? It is this very artifact they seek, a spiky little mysterious ball that the cleric Shadowheart, who's definitely in your party, who you kidding, carries on her person. And this artifact finally silences the voice and allows you to feel yourself again. Very, very curious and very ominous. Probably not something you want to give up easily. But I really love how Act 1 here feels as far as leaking weird pieces of information to you. Nothing really makes sense, and it shouldn't. This so-called prism, the bigger picture of the Absolute, this game keeps you in the dark for dozens upon dozens, maybe even 50 hours about big story concepts, but it knows that you're going to be so distracted with other content, with the character stories and quests, that you're never going to feel like narratively lost, or that there's any rush to go do a specific thing. Honestly, I find it to be pretty brilliant. It really reminds me of how masterful Act 1 of Divinity Original Sin 2 is, Larian's last hit game that, little secret for you, I actually like a bit more than Baldur's Gate 3, whoops. So no matter what moral decisions you make here, no matter which side of the goblin conflict you take, quests you do or skip, you must eventually wrap everything up and trek forward to learn more about this absolute. I mean, your party holds the prism they want so bad, so you just know you are going to be at the front and center of all of the events to come. So after hearing about it for the first 25 hours, the location Act 2 takes you to is where else but the Shadow-Cursed Lands and eventually Moonrise Towers itself. Well, for my money, the second Act 2 begins, it really feels like you're about to get to the good stuff, and oh boy, it is fantastic. The longest part of the game, and it feels like a true saga. But from your first steps into the Shadow-Cursed Lands, you really can see that Ketheric's realm is sick. It's ripped apart, it's diseased. This is beyond just a shadow. This is a necrotic land of undeath as well. And there are some very creepy, weird-ass people hanging around. Well, you're quickly going to learn that this shadow curse is no joke. You need to have a specialized moon lantern or some other method of powerful light staving it off, or you're going to have your HP drained quickly and be left for dead. Well, as you explore your surroundings, you are going to come across a group of harpers, and if you decide to help them in their fight, they're going to guide you to a place that comes to act as the home base of Act 2, the Last Light Inn. A tavern of the distant past that has seemingly, miraculously, been purged entirely of the Shadow Curse, and it's functioning as a sort of Harper camp as they have been looking into the impossible return of Ketheric Thorm, as well as this whole absolute thing themselves. Now this is of course where we encounter Jaheira. It's a big reveal of a character well known and loved from the original two Baldur's Gate games, and she gives us really the first forward-facing intel on who Ketheric Thorm is, or I guess who he was, and she also understandably needs to do some screening on you and the party to make sure you're on their side, even though you're infected with parasites. But shortly after that, we get to meet, in the surprisingly well-revived flesh, Ketheric's own Isabel Thorm. It seems Isabel fled from her father and then shortly after found this place, channeling her Selûnite powers to cast a protective bubble around the inn, allowing the Flaming Fist and the Harpers to come in and set up shop. Now Isabel and her involvement here is going to prove to be vital to taking down her father, but the conversation is cut short by this random-ass man named Marcus. A former Flaming Fist soldier that has been captured and infected by the Absolute Cult and then mind-controlled to fly here, capture Isabel, and bring her back to her dad. Now that is no good, and it's a harrowing representation of what Ketheric is willing to do to his own daughter he apparently loves so much. And after this little spat, Jaheira, Isabel, and the whole gang gets together and the task is crystal clear.
General Ketheric Thorm. Remember that name? He's the leader of the Absolutists.
He was a Sharan once.
Took to building an army of dark justiciars beneath this very village. Alongside the local druids, we made it our business to see him deposed, dead and buried. But he's returned. Not only does General Ketheric Thorm live again, it seems he is no longer mortal. He has become, in fact, invincible.
This mysterious Ketheric Thorm, he's got to be stopped. He is building up a massive army of followers of this god, the Absolute, and can seemingly issue orders to them to do his bidding. Jaheira and her faction have already fought this guy once, and they understand the sort of threat he is to the realms, but to stop him this time, they are absolutely going to need your help. So then off you are sent to get to the bottom of this whole mess. But before any of that, it is worth mentioning that Act 2 is stuffed to the brim with other fascinating Thorm family lore, because you can fully explore the town of Wraithwind, which of course is in absolute shambles, and here in the Toll House, you meet a very disturbing character named Garangoth Thorm, a woman who has seemingly turned entirely to gold. Now, she at some point in the distant past ran this toll house in front of the bridge to Moonrise Towers, but it seems like she has been corrupted by her greed, the Shadow Curse, necromancy, or all of the above. Now, her relation to Ketheric is completely unknown. Maybe a cousin, a sister, a distant aunt, who's to say? Then, in the Wraithwind Tavern, amongst a bunch of undead patrons, we find the grotesquely large and bloated Thisibald Thorm. barkeep and overall kind of pleasant, if not a little bit revolting chap that you can actually sit down, chat, and share a drink or two with before he explodes horrifically, or you can just fight him for his loot. And Thisibald, very interestingly, calls Ketheric his father. Now, this could be the sort of religious use of the word, as Ketheric spent most of his life as a paladin, but many fans, myself included, kind of count Thisibald here as a sort of bastard son. Very interesting little character. And then finally, in the House of Healing, the mad surgeon Malice Thorm, Ketheric's uncle, acts as a very sinister, disturbing presence and tough boss fight. Now this guy is a zealous follower of Shar, even now, which means surgery for him is not necessarily meant for healing and repair, but more pain and experimentation, a classic portrait of a twisted doctor. Some people have theorized that he was a Shar follower in secret even during his normal life, and maybe he was the one who first nudged Ketheric toward the Lady of Loss after the death of Isabel. Interesting stuff. So anyway, no matter what you're doing, the choices you make, you will eventually have to come to Moonrise Towers, and here, you will very likely be somewhat undercover. Not coming to claim Ketheric's head at the gates or anything dramatic, but as a true soul. I mean, you legitimately have the parasite in your head, and you get to mask as a member of the cult. The best way to learn intimate information about the Absolute is to get as close to the General as possible. But upon walking in, it does not take long for us to have an unforgettable first meeting with the man of the hour, deciding the fate of some incompetent goblins.
You were ordered to retrieve the artifact. You failed to do so.
Take it up with Minthara! She's the one who...
Enough!
A blast of mental energy washes over you, filling the room. Your tadpole squirms, urging you to obey.
You failed to retrieve the artifact. You failed to protect your true soul. You do not deserve to live.
You ain't serious. You can't be.
General Thorm?
Let our newest arrival speak. You have seen what these creatures are capable of, and you have seen their inadequacies, isn't that so? What is your judgment?
We did as we were told. We're loyal to the Absolute. Tell him!
Enough! True soul, tell the General how the goblins served our cause.
It ain't true! We're good as anyone! Just give us a chance.
And there you have it. We're too close to the ending, and the new beginning. I can coddle failure no longer. Kill them, quickly.
What? No!
You creaking old bag of shit!
I'm so sorry, my lord. She's an unbeliever outside my control.
Try again. Dispose of the rest as you see fit. Or better yet, put that true soul to use. You have far more important matters to attend to. Or have you forgotten?
Of course not, my lord. Thank you.
Now, I kid you not, this right here might be my favorite introduction to any villain in the history of video games. It is just so brutal and visceral. I mean, this poor goblin, she rolled a 20 on this chuck and this chop, but still just gets absolutely folded by Thorm. And I think it shows you everything you need to know about this character. He is seen as the ultimate authority by members of the cult. He's militaristic, he's violent, he's calm, he sees all those around him as replaceable, and oh yeah, He's immortal, son. Also, let's all just take a second to stand and clap for J.K. Simmons, man. One of the coolest actors out there, period, who is no stranger to video game voiceover. I mean, we covered a ton of his best work in the GLaDOS video a few years back, where he plays Cave Johnson. And I just think Simmons smashes this role, a sort of soft elven strength but with the hint of depression and vacancy in his voice. He has an amazing presence, and it doesn't hurt that the character design is wildly on point. We need to normalize elves with big ass beards just like this. Incredible. Well, assuming you are still undercover at this point, you will report to this orc Zarel, who's sort of like Ketheric's right-hand gal, to get an assignment. It seems Ketheric needs some relic of his, something located in the Thorm family mausoleum, something that Ketheric's advisor Balthazar was meant to go and retrieve, but he still hasn't returned. Interesting. So off you go, and this is when you personally really uncover some of the great backstory and lore we talked about earlier. Those cool murals of the Sharan version of Ketheric, his wife's tomb, the busts and statues of the Ketheric we never got to know a lifetime ago. And then you yourself get to descend down into the Gauntlet of Shar. Now, you need to keep in mind that a ton of this section of the game is surrounding Shadowheart and her story. I mean, she's a cleric of Shar, but you also get to meet that Yurgir fellow of Raphael's. You get to talk to Raphael himself and a few other things, but there's so much going on I want to try anyway to stick as close as we can to just Ketheric. So once you progress through the trials, you meet Balthazar's ugly ass and you reach the end of the whole thing, you stand at a pool that will transport you and your party to where else but the Shadowfell. Because remember that final step in the Dark Justiciar process. And remember that quest called the Night Song? Well, stepping into the pool shows us the truth. The Night Song, this supposed relic, is another name for Dame Aelin, the daughter of Selûne. And we get to descend into her prison that she has been in for over 100 years. This right here is the relic Ketheric wants retrieved. He wants Aelin moved to the Moonrise Towers to keep the source of his current immortality close at hand and safe. And this is one of the biggest moments of player choice that will have ripple effects across your entire current playthrough. Because remember, this is the Shadowheart show right now. Well, she has on her a legendary Sharan spear blessed by the evil goddess herself that will not only be able to pierce the heart of Aelin and dub Shadowheart a Dark Justiciar, but it will also permanently kill her. At last, no more immortality. Now this also obviously would sever the connection between her immortal soul and Ketheric's. However, if you are going for the more good route, you can just free Dame Aelin from her prison, turn Shadowheart from the path of darkness, and remove Ketheric's immortality all the same. Then the Night Song will actually assist you in fighting Thorm and other enemies later on, and you can reunite her with Isabel. But whatever suits your fancy, man, there's no wrong way to play. Dame Aelin just has to be removed from this physical prison if you want to progress the story, even if that means you let Balthazar take her still imprisoned back to Moonrise Towers, but I mean, no one does that, man. He's so killable, come on. Well, whatever you pick at that moment, Ketheric becomes entirely killable. His most overpowered asset is removed from the equation, and his closest advisor is dead. Now that's pretty good progress, considering he still doesn't even know who you are or what is going on and how much danger he is about to be in. You then have time to finish up any lingering quests or exploration you want to do here in Act 2 before your party, the Harpers, and other allies decide to make your bold move and march on Moonrise Towers.
That beacon of angelic wrath has taken the fight to Ketheric on the rooftop, and the first line of defense are dead. But storming the tower won't be easy, and if we wait too long, Ketheric will gather his strength and retaliate. For now, though, he's on the back foot for the first time since he returned from the grave.
This is it. The spearhead moment.
You brought us this far.
So how shall we proceed?
Now, besieging this castle is a very good time. It feels like an impactful and dangerous Hail Mary at stopping Ketheric, and the general is at his most vulnerable in this moment.
What have you done? What have you done to me? A pawn cannot lecture the chosen of the gods. You serve the Absolute. You serve Me. Bow, you dog. Bow! The prism. You've had it all this time, you worm. You will bow before me. And if you will not bow, you will break. You.
How good it is to see you again, Ketheric. At last you found a godmaster that suits you, it seems.
Halen, the thief. You stole Isabel from me, and now you think you'll take my life in the bargain?
You dare to speak her name. After your crimes innumerable, you would evoke her before me!
Enough! This ends, here and now. At last.
He will crumble at the power of your touch. Give him all you have. The gods fight at our side!
Now keep in mind, there are many different outcomes here, scenes, dialogue possibilities, and whatnot based on your actions. I am just showing you one. I mean, you can even attempt to persuade Ketheric out of his scheme.
There is no redemption, can't you see? It is too late. If Melodia could see all I've done, she'd know. She'd know her husband died long ago with Isabel. Unlike Isabel, he could not be brought back. I wish it could be so. I do. But the Moon Maiden did not intervene when my life was dismantled piece by piece. And when I tried to buy it back, it cost me everything. Everything. We are copper pieces in their belts. Tokens to be traded for scraps. You have beaten me, true soul. But the gods beat me first.
Ketheric Thorm!
I was a fool to hesitate. Power like mine cannot be hidden, cannot be cowed. But power like mine has a price. A price I am destined to pay. You have one last chance to bow.
Again, I just adore the performance here. It's so good. You can tell he is shaken at your feat of taking away his immortality. Part of him even looks, terrified. Especially when the prism reacts to him attempting to control your tadpole, Ketheric sees firsthand how it defended you from the influence of the Absolute, and now, he has to kill you and claim it for himself, or else the entire plan of the Chosen Three is in jeopardy. So in this first fight, it's pretty standard stuff. Gameplay-wise, Ketheric is an undead Oathbreaker paladin, which is just the most badass thing I've ever heard of. I want to play as one of those. And he summons all sorts of undead minions, including his beloved dog, Squire, to make the fight irritating, especially on higher difficulties. But all you need to do is grind him down to 25% health or lower, and Ketheric stops the fight.
Enough. My lord beckons me. You must return to your prison, and my daughter must be reclaimed.
Your daughter? Isabel?
Sure as she. This has only begun.
Alright, well, A giant tentacle? Not exactly what we usually associate with undead armies of a god like Merkul or the general gothic vibe of the Shadow-Cursed lands and all that. The whole illithid theme seems to be the dominant one the further into this game you get. And if you are a curious player, you likely poked around Moonrise Towers before the big siege and possibly found the horrors that lie beneath this fortress. A full-on ancient illithid colony, which absolutely predates the building of Moonrise Towers, Wraithwind, Ketheric, or anything. This thing has been flourishing below the Shadow-Cursed lands for a long time. I mean, the tendrils, the fleshy, nasty architecture, something is connecting all of this stuff with the Tadpole, the Absolute, and Ketheric Thorm. The only way to find out truly what's going on is chasing after the general.
You said it was under control.
It isn't you I answer to, Gortash.
Oh, the general voice. Is this where we salute?
Salute, yes, with cleavers through his blood-starved flesh. How it crawls with failure, like flies on lick-wet carrion.
You forget yourself, Orin. I've played my part.
You've built an army for our masters, true enough, but what of the astral prison? A rogue true soul flaunting it under your nose all this time, and you ran from him.
Sure that they would follow and deliver it into my hands here. If you would cease these distractions.
The distractions have been yours, Ketheric. Perhaps we never should have dug your daughter up. So you haven't lost your edge, but you're still not as sharp as Orin, I wager. The Slayer against the Undying One. That'd be fun to see.
His crypt breath sings to my sinews again. But he must lead the murder march to Baldur's grave.
If the weapon is truly in your grasp, Ketheric, might I suggest closing your fist? Orin and I can wait for you no longer. The plan proceeds. We're going to the city, and we expect you to follow. Army and the weapon in tow.
The Edict of Bane!
The Lash of Thorm!
One of the cruelest and most powerful creatures in existence, enslaved by mere mortals.
There we are. It wouldn't do to fight in front of our guests. Behold, Duke Ravengard, the Absolute.
Helm preserve us.
You wag your word flap in vain, Alderling. Once the worm holds the whip, your shredded flesh will serve us.
Now, it's really time we were going. We will empty this place and begin the march. You may catch up with the army once you've retrieved the weapon. And Ketheric, do try not to sulk. You're supposed to be the fearsome general come to conquer the city. And I am the hero who will save it.
It is time, faithful ones. March on Baldur's Gate. We go to prepare the way.
Okay, now there's a ton to unpack in that scene. First off, it's our first look at the dysfunctional trio all meeting together, and it definitely seems to me like Ketheric is kind of the black sheep on this team. I mean, he's failing. He is getting beat back by a rogue true soul, and this artifact we have, the Astral Prism, all three of them know its power and danger. But holy smokes, they have one of the High Dukes of the city of Baldur's Gate with them, who also happens to be Will, a party member of ours, father, and they infect him with the parasite. I mean, being able to control the mind of one of the most powerful politicians in the realm, that's definitely not a good sign. And then, of course, the biggest reveal of all, the so-called Absolute, not a god, an elder brain, and a massive thing. And if you don't know, what this actually is essentially the highest life form of the Mind Flayer life cycle. Just this big old noodle with psionic powers that act as the sort of control center of any given Illithid colony, and this one specifically was the master of the Mind Flayer colony under Moonrise Towers. But it seems that the Chosen Three have essentially wrangled it, brought it under their own command with an artifact on its little brain head up there known as the Crown of Karsus. Now, believe me, I could make an entire long-winded video about just this crown and its origins, but all you really need to know is this thing was crafted a long time ago by a mortal arcanist named Karsus, who briefly became divine and attempted to supplant the goddess of magic Mystra. It is a very dangerous item and a very powerful item. An item that the Chosen Three have somehow retrieved, plopped onto this Elder Brain, and each of them being blessed by the Dead Three carry a unique Netherese gemstone. When combined together, act as a way to control the crown and thus the brain's every action. They are able to communicate and command all of those folks infected with its tadpoles. These were never meant to transform anyone into Mind Flayers at this stage, but simply to plant a seed of psionic control. I mean, one has to wonder what else is at play here. Are things really as they seem? There are so many questions after this scene, and that is by design. But for this moment, we have seen enough. It is up to us to finish the fight against Ketheric. I mean, he wants the prism, and you now need his magical gemstone. Someone is about to die.
There you are, as predicted. What is it, I wonder, that draws one toward death like a moth to light? You could have run away, absconded with the prism. The one thing that could prevent me from fulfilling my destiny. But the lure of one's destiny is irresistible, isn't it? Perhaps you hope to learn your place in history before you are erased from it. A bright flash of clarity before the snuffing out. Impossible. You are bound to it, and in death it will bind you to me. That is the power my Lord Merkel has granted me. Command over the immeasurable legions of the dead. But he did not only give me power, he gave me the one thing no other god could grant me. My daughter's life returned. Her heart beating once more. For that, he asked that I serve as his chosen. Join Orin and Gortash to grow the cult of the Absolute, and then take control of it. He's never had a more devoted follower. I have fought great wars before, in the service of other gods and other powers, but for Merkel I would condemn all of Faerun to death. You are all that stands between me and my destiny, and you have brought the prism here. I will kill you now, and then I will raise you as my servant. Yes. Join the army of the dead, true soul. Witness Lord Merkel's glory.
I think "I will kill you now and raise you as my servant" is one of the hardest lines any villain in any video game has ever uttered, if you ask me. So this next phase of the fight is Ketheric Thorm at his full power. More undead minions, amazing Illithid colony arena that looks all diseased. It's just a great boss battle that honestly for me is not topped by many others in BG3. But when you finally strike him down here, you'd be silly to think things are over.
What a fool you are. You cannot kill me. I am eternal. Myrkul, Lord of Bones, I am here. I am ready. I am yours!
Absolute cinema right here, man. Just amazing. Now, it might seem that this is Myrkul himself, but no. This is known as the Apostle of Myrkul, an avatar of the Lord of Bones rising out of Ketheric's defeat. And this is a perfect, wonderful finale to the whole saga that is Act 2. But when this fight concludes, we hear from Ketheric one final time.
Impossible. Death cannot take me. I am its master. My lord, hear me. Nothing. I am forsaken. You have no idea what you've done. Isabel.
And this is the end of Ketheric Thorm. Upon looting his body, you find his armor, the netherstone, weapons, shield, and a crumpled up note that he seemingly always kept with him, which simply reads, "Papa, I love you, love from Is." But unfortunately, you don't have much time to reflect on your fallen foe. You now have to rush off to Baldur's Gate ahead of the Absolute Army's march and find a way to stop the remaining Chosen Two. It's honestly strange to make such a big video on a villain that is this well constructed, written, acted, and grand in scale when he's just killed off about halfway through the game he stars in. It's truly a testament to the amount of other plot lines, other characters, and of course, larger villainous forces than Thorm to be dealt with. So now, I invite you to just kind of kick back with me and have a little chat about this guy because I have thoughts. Ketheric is one of my favorite villains of the last 5 to 10 years of video games, honestly, and definitely the coolest villain in any recent RPG that I have played to completion. And I think, as usual, that just boils down to a great backstory and relatable motives. Thorm had quite a few changes of heart over his lifetime, that much is obvious, but I do think one word can summarize this villain's whole existence very, very well: devotion. Ketheric is a deeply, deeply loyal and religious character, and when you think about it, he only ever acts in the name of whatever deity he is currently serving. For Selûne, he constructed Moonrise Towers and the entire haven that was Wraithwind. For Shar, he built a massive temple, the Trials, and attempted to conquer the Heartlands in her name. And for Myrkul, as he himself puts it, he was prepared to condemn all of Faerûn to death to repay the return of his Isabel. This is an antagonist defined by his service to the gods, but ultimately, this is a man who was nothing more than a pawn in their own divine games. A man that gave everything, a man that lost everything, and a man that died with nothing but sorrow and anger in his heart twice. And even upon regaining his beloved daughter, she was too disturbed, too put off, too confused by what her father had twisted into to ever stand at his side again. But we have talked so many times in these villain videos about villains that fans, you guys, claim did nothing wrong. But man, Ketheric does not fall into that camp. He did pretty much everything wrong. He made mistake after mistake after mistake that only dug him into a deeper and deeper hole, no pun intended. But even still, this character is not just evil. No, it's not that simple. Every single action he takes is rooted in this genuine desire to restore what was taken from him, the love and home that he lost. He doesn't personally ever show us this insatiable hunger for power, for influence, for wealth, infamy, godhood, or anything of the like. However, he is absolutely willing to align with the most malicious forces in the known universe and do their bidding to achieve his private ambitions, consequences be damned. So maybe then it is appropriate that he is left as this sort of mini-villain in the grand scheme of things, because to put it simply, he just isn't built for the larger evil role. Now, as I stated, in my humble opinion, Act 2 of Baldur's Gate 3 from beginning to end, it's the best this game has to offer. The setting of the Shadow-Cursed Lands, the way the Thorm storyline is drip-fed to you over time through all these characters, locations, items, and just great general environmental storytelling. This is all elite stuff on display from a game design perspective. So yes, there are bigger, badder dudes around, and yes, it seems Ketheric is not the classic pure evil archetype we have come to expect in high fantasy settings like this, but that is what makes him fantastic as a villain. The notion that once upon a time, he wasn't so different from you or from me. A family-loving man that fell down the all-consuming rabbit hole of despair and turned himself into a monster. Thank you guys so much for watching or listening to the very end. This was a very fun one to put together for sure. Now remember, BG3 has so many different branching ways things can shake out, the dialogue options, the choices, and so many other details, so even though this felt somewhat comprehensive, there is still so much more to go discover for yourself, and I urge you to do so. Keep an eye out in the not too distant future for part 2 on the next member of the Chosen 3 I want to tackle, or in the Red, where we can really see the plot of the Absolute and the Dead 3 expand and reach a climax with the Gortash episode to follow. Thank you again to Manscaped for sponsoring this video, thanks to all my patrons for supporting, and that is all for today. So, go play some games everyone, be kind to one another, be kind to yourself, and I will see you all very, very soon. Until next time, peace.